Hello there, I'm Miranda Gretton, and this is Take a Moment with NCHC, the show where we talk to you and your colleagues about experiences that affect you. Listen on your drive between patients or in your downtime, whenever you get the chance to take a moment.
My name's Richard Nash. I'm 57 and I'm a clinical specialist physiotherapist in the musculoskeletal team, specifically working in the orthopaedic triage department.
So, Richard, you've joined me today to talk about living with Parkinson's disease, which is a condition in which parts of the brain become progressively damaged over many years. Let's go right back to the beginning. Tell me about the first sign that you had from your body that made you think, oh, do you know what? I think I should visit the GP.
So it was the summer of 2018, and I was noticing that I was finding it quite difficult to use my right hand to text with on the phone. What I realized I was doing, I was using my right hand is the one that's affected, or was affected first, and I was using my left thumb to move my right thumb around on the keyboard. And somebody said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm texting." And they said, "No, but what are you doing with your hand?" I said, "Oh, if I just use my right thumb normally, it's just, nonsense. So I have to do it like this." And that really then, you sort of, I notice this with patients all the time. We adapt to things, especially if they come on quite gradually. And this had probably been something I'd been doing for a little while, and I hadn't really even noticed it. I was just texting. And then I noticed that typing on a keyboard was not quite so easy with my right hand. So I thought, it's been a long time since I've done anything neurologically, but I thought this feels a bit weird. It doesn't feel quite right. So I'm a man, so I ignored it for a bit. And I noticed, though, that it wasn't getting any better. So I went to see my GP. I'd noticed I'd got, holding my hands out, that there was a slight tremor in my right hand. And the GP said, "Oh, I suppose you think you've got Parkinson's, do you?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, but I know it's not right. It doesn't seem right." So eventually the referral to the NHS came through. I had a scan of my brain and it confirmed, yeah, I've got Parkinson's disease. So I phoned my wife at the time and said they think it's Parkinson's disease. That was when it hit me, really. Not when I was sat in the clinic room. It was afterwards, when I was sort of wandering around in a bit of a daze, and I thought, well, Parkinson's is not going to go away, so it's going to be something I'm going to have to come to terms with, and that took a while, actually.
What was the reaction from friends and family?
Well, family were quite shocked, really, because in many ways I'm quite private about those sorts of things. I don't like anybody coming with me to the hospital. I prefer to deal with all that sort of stuff on my own. But of course, you can't really with something like this, because it has an impact on everything. I was in a slightly different role at the time. I was doing a more of a managerial role at the time, and I ummed and ahed about what to do about telling colleagues, because it's a private thing, but it's also potentially going to have an impact on work. So I did open up to people at work, and I have to say, everybody that's involved with the trust that I've had any dealings with around this has been absolutely fantastic. And friends, on the whole, most didn't even recognize that there was a problem, because I'm on a good regime of drugs that help me maintain what on the outside looks quite normal. But people do understand, and I felt very supported both at home and at work. So yeah, and that makes a big difference. But then there's the other times when you're on your own. I mean, I've had many times when I've gone through some of the frustrations and just feeling quite low and quite anxious about what the future will hold for me. So knowing that that everybody here and within my family are very supportive makes a big difference.
I bet.
Yeah.
And I presume with the sort of physical symptoms that you almost can't hide it. So people will start to see. And so I guess the more people who know and can support you properly, then the better. And you mentioned the tremor in your hand there, and I think that is, I think a lot of people will recognize that as one of the main symptoms of
Yeah.
Parkinson's, alongside things like slow movements and stiff and inflexible muscles. But you mentioned another word there, anxiety, and I think a lot of people maybe underestimate the other symptoms that go with this, such as anxiety, depression, problems sleeping, which I know is a real issue for you as well, Richard,
Yeah.
particularly. So
Yeah.
tell me about that. What's the impact of that on your work and your life in general?
I think the non-motor symptoms are more difficult to rationalize, really, because, as you said, we're probably quite familiar with some of the motor stuff. We see people, particularly if you work in the clinical role, we see people with the gait issues and the slowness of movement and tremor. But I hadn't, I mean, honestly, Miranda, I hadn't really realized how profound the non-motor symptoms are for Parkinson's and some of its related conditions. And I would say for me, they're a bigger problem than the motor ones, because I can vividly remember having panic attacks in the early stages when I was not long after I'd been diagnosed, and lying 4 o'clock in the morning, lying on my bed, and just sort of felt like the whole of my world was just spinning out of control, really, and getting sort of palpitations and rapid breathing, and I had to really control my that anxiety, and tapped into all of the mindfulness stuff that luckily I was aware of to just calm myself back down. I think it's worth mentioning those sort of symptoms that accompany a condition like Parkinson's, because I just don't think that many people would be aware of it. Anxiety is a big part of it. I found myself much more reluctant to go into large crowds of people, which is something which I don't think was ever a problem for me before. And sleep, wow. I probably get on average about 4 or 5 hours a night. And once I'm awake, I'm awake. It can be quite tough because you do adapt to it, but there's a build up of, if I've had a really rotten week and I've had several nights where I'm waking up very early, that by the end of the week can be quite tough. So I get much more tired than I ever did before. My energy levels can be really quite low. So I've adapted. I'm much more willing to just say no to things and be a bit more sort of self-aware that I need to harness my energy.
Mm. I mean, aside from the physical toll that lack of sleep takes on your body, the middle of the night is also, it's a very dark place for thoughts and feelings, isn't it? So
Yeah,
if you're up and you're awake, you don't want to sort of fall down a rabbit hole of that anxiety in the middle of the night, because there's no one to talk to, there's no one to help you rationalize that. So
exactly.
tell me about what you did turn to.
Yeah, well, I've turned to painting. I never did art at school. I was much more science-based. I'd had a little bit of a dabble with some painting 8 or 9 years ago. I just thought I want to be able to do this, and whether it looks okay and people like it is irrelevant, really, because it's about me spending some time doing my own thing. So I started with using acrylic paints, and they're really versatile. A few people commented that they thought, that they looked okay. They thought they looked quite good, which I thought was good. But it was more the process, really, of losing myself in the doing of a hobby that took me away from all of those dark nighttime thoughts, and I could sort of squirrel myself away in a corner of the house, and I would find myself 2.5 hours later or 3 hours later thinking, oh Christ, I've got to get ready to work. I've got to get ready to go to work. I've really got to put this down. Or I would be at the weekends, I'd just find myself thinking of nothing other than what I was doing. And it was a real pleasure to find something that I was enjoying. I turned to art, but as much for the comfort that I got from losing myself in doing the process, but also I found it's actually quite helpful because I'm right-handed. My right hand is the one that's mostly affected by the Parkinson's, and there is some value in doing something that requires that fine motor control in the hand. So I think it's also quite good for that from a therapy point of view with something like Parkinson's, because it doesn't go away and it needs a lot of management. I mean, I'm on a fair amount of medication, but using art as a way of helping to deal with this sort of anxiety and stress it's been good.
Well,
And
you're obviously pretty good at it as well, because you've had I didn't know if you were going to say this yourself, but I don't think you are, so I'm going to say it for you. You've had two of your paintings exhibited in the Oxo Gallery in London, haven't you?
I
Which is
did,
amazing.
yeah.
Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so I do quite a lot of landscapes and seascapes. I've done some wildlife painting of birds and things. So you skim through the internet finding pictures, and I stumbled across a website called Parkinson's Art. It's basically a charity. They host a website where you can exhibit some of your paintings, and they hold every year an exhibition. So I submitted a couple of my paintings, and two of them were chosen. So the exhibition, it's called Out of the Blue. Yeah, with a diagnosis like Parkinson's, it comes for a lot of people out of the blue. So that was the sort of premise. It started in Liverpool, and then it transferred down to the Oxo Gallery on the South Bank. So yeah, I ended up being an exhibited artist on the South Bank in London, and I loved it. I loved the whole thing. You know, we went down and looked and posed behind the paintings, and it goes up on Facebook and all that sort of stuff. But just, it's nice. It's a good feeling when you've created something, other people quite like it enough to say, yeah, we want to put it up in the public and let other people see it. It's quite a nice feeling.
To have this diagnosis, and like you say, it doesn't go away. So it's something you've got to come to terms with, is a huge thing. And so to have found a way to find not only some positives for you on a daily basis, but also something that's a bit of a legacy, to paint these paintings and have had them exhibited, and to be able to say that is a really positive thing. Are you quite a positive person in terms of how you're coping?
Up and down. I think I have positive, and there are times when I'm less positive, and other times when I'm more up. And I think my partner now, she's a business coach, and she's done a lot of coaching, and she's also done a lot of grief therapy, and she's probably the most positive person I've ever met in my life. We had some very interesting conversations around how you can shape your response to anything, really. It's okay to feel cross and angry and sad, but also you can make a decision to try to change your response if you allow yourself to feel some of the negative stuff, and almost sort of, that's okay, you can feel like that, but also you can also go in another direction, which is a more positive one. And I think that, for me, that was encapsulated really with the art exhibition. I wouldn't be sat here talking to you about being an exhibited artist in a gallery in London without Parkinson's disease. So it's an interesting thing to think about, really. And I've resigned or resolved some of my inner angst and turmoil and anger at the diagnosis into thinking, well, I'm going to take it and do something positive with it. And if I can reach other people and help anybody else with either a diagnosis of this, of Parkinson's, or anything that's a long-term degenerative condition, then maybe that's the thing to do. I even think of my medication in a different way now. I used to really resent it because I take tablets every 3 hours. So I start at 6 in the morning and I go until I go to bed at night, and I take a long acting tablet overnight. So gosh, it used to make me cross filling these little odd things. I've got one here. Oh, I need to take some in a minute. One of these things. And I used to get really sort of build these blinking things back up again. These are my enablers now. These enable me to do the things that I want to do. So they're good. Whereas before I used to think of them as they're a hassle, a cross that I have to take these. Little things like that, I think, make a big difference, because you see it in a different way. You see it from a different angle, and that it is what it is, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep going, keep working, keep as active as I can. I think the art therapy, it's flicked a bit of a switch in my head, taking Parkinson's from a negative side to perhaps, I'm not going to say positive necessarily, but a less negative. It's allowed me to do something which I'll be very proud of, and I know, my kids are very chuffed. When your 23-year-old daughter goes, "Wow, Dad, that's really cool."
Oh, that's lovely.
So yeah, it has been a bit of a journey, but I think I could have disappeared down a rabbit hole with it, and it's great when you do sort of do some reflection. So talking to you is helping. It's really useful to just reflect sometimes, because we don't get the chance, do we?
I think that reframing that you're doing, which you've put so beautifully, about how you can take something and, like your medication, and just reframe it slightly to make it less of a chore and more of a, like you say, an enabler. I think it does take time to get to that headspace. And I also think it doesn't happen every day. You'll wake up some days and still say, "Oh, I've got to take those blooming pills." And that's okay. It's just that the following day you might say, "No, come on, Richard, they are a good thing," and it's about that journey as well, isn't it? And I think
Yeah,
it's important that people know that it's okay to have days, weeks, months when you're not okay. That's also all right.
yeah, yeah, absolutely right. There are days when it is harder, and I think being gentle with yourself on those days, being kind, and being open with your friends and your family, and actually being kind to yourself and just saying, this is okay. I'm not in a great place today, and I'm going to look after me. Actually being open about when things aren't so good is, in the long term, it's a much better strategy. You need to look after you, and I think perhaps Parkinson's allowed me to do that as well, a bit more, to actually say, I don't feel so chipper today. I'm going to just listen to my body and listen to whatever my mind is telling me, and just look after me for a day. But you need to explain that to the people around you so that they understand, because I think that then it's easier the next time it happens. Help them to understand when you're in that sort of place.
That is an interesting perspective for yourself who has Parkinson's. What else would you say to somebody as a kind of piece of advice who is perhaps caring for somebody, or knows a friend who's been just recently been diagnosed?
Don't despair. Don't feel like you're the only one. Really, you aren't. There's a lot of support around. So I think I would definitely recommend checking out Parkinson's UK website. There's an awful lot of information, and there's information about local support groups for people who've been diagnosed, and also for carers. The NHS website is excellent. There's a service that's run by NCH&C, the neurology nursing team, and I'll say hello to Sheila, who's been my Parkinson's nurse, and she's fantastic. Yeah, so it's about looking for support, really. I think, Miranda, it's about the professional support from the healthcare, and looking for support from the charity side of things, and the information stuff online. It can feel overwhelming, but with time and support, and with the right sort of treatment, you'll get used to the reality, but it doesn't happen overnight. So yeah, be kind to yourself. Be gentle. There may be something very positive that'll come out of what doesn't seem to be a very positive place. When I think back to how I felt at the time of the diagnosis to how I feel now, I'm a million miles away from where I was then. Last year it was the South Bank. Could be New York next year. Who knows?
thank you for listening to Take a Moment with NCHC. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please visit the podcast intranet page to leave a comment and for details of our other episodes. You can also follow NCHC on all social media channels.